Buenas noches a todos y a todas, y un agradecimiento muy especial a nuestros anfitriones de Vancouver. Un saludo muy atento a las compañeras y los compañeros del panel. Y ahora voy a cambiar de cassette y hacer la presentación en inglés. So I was asked to speak about the situation of higher education in the United States with regard to privatization, NAFTA, and the TPP. And I want to start with an analytical framework and a general framework to understand what's going on with higher education in the United States. And the premise here is that education under capitalism involves a supply of labor for what capital needs. It involves, secondly, how do you socialize and indoctrinate each new generation, and for that matter, the adult population, into the existing social order? How do you construct hegemony? How do you carry out social control through the educational system? And third, higher education is, under capitalism, provides what we can call a brain trust for transnational capital. That is, una reserva cerebral de los conocimientos. So, historically, these aspects of higher education have been countered by mass struggles and by the efforts of the state to harmonize these needs of capital and the market with social reproduction. But in the late 20th century, the World Bank set the worldwide agenda for higher education, the neoliberal agenda. It issued its famous report, which said that we need to move from basic needs approach of the World Bank, which said education from kindergarten right up to higher education for the entire population, to their new neoliberal approach, which called for universal primary education, and let's not even talk about the content of that primary education, the progressive privatization of secondary education, and the progressive privatization of higher education. So the question is, why this World Bank neoliberal agenda? Well, in this new globalized stage of world capitalism, this new globalized production and financial system that we have, the system has been completely and continues to be completely restructured worldwide and integrated. And so global capitalism has distinct and different needs for the global labor supply. And we can identify three types of labor or workers that this new global capitalism needs. The first is a cadre of organic intellectuals who are going to do the thinking and the strategizing for the system as a whole. And they go to the world-class universities, in quotes, right, to Harvard and to Yale and to Oxford and to Cambridge in Mexico, to the Monterrey Institute, to the Iberoamericana, et cetera. This is a small group of humanity, tiny group. The next group that the new globalized capitalism needs from higher education is really a small army of technocrats, of professionals, and of administrators who are supposed to be resolving the problems that the system has for its own maintenance and its own development. But then, that's also a small group. The next group that the global capitalist system needs coming out of higher education is a very large army who are going to be doing now routine, de-skilled labor, and who should not be, according to the system, thinking critically and thinking reflexively. And it also needs a mass of surplus humanity, surplus labor, who can serve as a reserve supply of manual and other forms of flexible labor, and who can be discarded when their labor is not needed. That is the World Bank vision for higher education worldwide. And so now, with that as the larger context, and with a very limited time that I have, I want to identify 7 tendencies underway specifically now in the United States and higher, but this is worldwide, but the US situation with these 7 tendencies. The first is we're seeing a bifurcation of professors and teachers, but here higher education, into those who are tenured and an incredible deepening of contract professors facing completely precaritized labor conditions, the precaritization of the professorship. That's now 70 to 80% of university professors in the United States under these precarious conditions, and you receive below poverty wages and no benefits whatsoever. That's the first of the 7. The second is we're seeing a switch from the public funding of higher education to tuition-led funding. What I mean by that is the state is no longer assuming the cost and the responsibility for funding higher education. Rather, students have to assume that cost through ever-rising tuition. So to give you an example, the average public university tuition in 1975 was $7,800 in 2015 dollars, already very expensive. Fast forward to 2015, it's now nearly $20,000. So that's a 254% increase in tuition, average in the United States in the last few decades of neoliberalism. That locks out a significant portion of the population. It locks out so-called surplus labor, and it locks out the poorest and, of course, racially and ethnically oppressed groups disproportionately. That's the second tendency underway. The third tendency is the incredible growth of private for-profit universities. Now, you know that there's three types of universities: the public university, then there's private but non-profit universities, but what's exponential growth is the private for-profit universities. Of course, no different in Mexico or anywhere around the world, but this is the US story, the United States story of this. So 766,000 students were enrolled in 2001 in private for-college universities. That jumped to 2.4 million in 2010. And from 1998 to 2008, the increase of for total enrollment for public education, it increased by 31%. But in the private for-profit universities, it increased by 225%. Now the average cost of an associate degree, that's 2 years at the university level, for the public community colleges that serve the poor and the working class, is $8,300 for your 2 years of study. In the for-profit private universities, it's $35,000. If you want to get a 4-year degree, a licenciatura, it's at the public university, $52,000, already ridiculously expensive, but at the private for-profit universities, it's more, $63,000. 48% of students in the United States for higher education take out student loans at the public university. It's 96% for the private for-profit universities. And what is happening is the state is subsidizing private transnational capital for these universities. So federal grants to students that go to public schools amounted to $5.4 billion, and to $7.5 billion for students that go to the private for-profit universities. That means the states make students take out loans that they'll be paying all their life and never pay off in order to hand that over to private transnational capital in these private universities. So all of this represents... Claro que sí. Ajá, ajá. Quizá cambia al español. ¿Se puede hacer la traducción en inglés, del español al inglés? Ok, siento presionado por el tiempo. Ok. Ok. Ok, disculpe, perdón. Ajá. El chico que está traduciendo no alcanza a decir todo lo que está diciendo. Ok, mis disculpas. Ok. So get an extra minute for that interruption? Okay. So all of this, what it's representing is an escalation of public and state subsidization for corporate-owned and run schools. And that's the general neoliberal model for the whole world, for everything, but this is the US higher education application. The fourth dimension here is what in English they call public-private partnerships, asociación pública-privadas, in which the state subsidizes research taking place at public universities in order to take the results of that research and hand it over to private corporations. So there's two models here. The first model is in which the state has its agencies in the United States, National Institute for Health, National Institute for Science, funds those public institutions through working class payments and taxes, and then out of those institutes, through the universities, comes the research results that get turned over to the pharmaceutical communities, companies, to the military-industrial complex, to the energy and petroleum corporations. So you can see the state is subsidizing this research turned over to corporate capital. And on our campuses, I'm talking about public universities, biochemistry, physics, etc., all become appendages of corporate research needs. And so public universities fund this accumulation of private capital, and we see a fusion of university funding and corporate capital. And again, because you have to link these 7 dimensions, it is financed through working class students paying tuition through loans that go back to the global banks anyway. So as you can see, all la tela araña de este sistema. So the research agenda on our campuses, the academic agenda, the general intellectual agenda now becomes established by transnational capital more than ever. And universities stop being a public brain trust, right? Reserva de los conocimientos para la sociedad, ya no es una reserva pública, y se convierte en una reserva privada para capital transnacional. The fifth of these 7 dimensions is this accumulation of student debt. So student debt is now $1 trillion in the United States. Now the translation for that is, I think, un billón, se confunde mucho con de numeración en inglés y en español. Un billón, $1 trillion. This represents, and that has increased 400% since the beginning of the 21st century. That's that neoliberal term that the World Bank called for. That is a tremendous tribute to transnational finance capital. And it is an enormous claim of transnational finance capital on the future wages of the working class. And of course, disproportionately impacting the poorest, the subemployed and precaritized dimensions of the working class, and the racially oppressed minorities, which are the lowest rungs of the working class. Now, 40% of US citizens now owe student debt for higher education. So that becomes a major mechanism of social control. If you want to get a job now in the United States, you have to get a credit check before anyone will hire you. And the credit check will say, are you not paying your student loans? You don't get hired, including government and private hiring. Housing. Credit, if you want to get a credit card and you can't survive without credit, that's part of your being sucked into the financial system. So this is a mechanism of tremendous social control. And like the tuition hikes, it locks out surplus labor, the poorest, and the racially oppressed groups of the working class. It also forces the poorest sectors of the working class to turn to the for-profit private universities, which will give you student loans, but won't give you anything else. So you can be locked in. And this is the new speculative bubble in the global casino. After the collapse of the mortgage bubble and the collapse of the energy bubble, we now have the student debt bubble. Six of the 7 points, the 6th now is that the mass struggles of the 1960s and 1970s worldwide and in the United States, they brought to the university a change in the curriculum. And so you had the rise of ethnic studies programs, third world studies programs, women's studies programs, and now with the creeping, that is la privatización progresiva de las universidades, okay, what we see is the privatization, and all of these tendencies I'm talking about is impacting most directly and most immediately these programs brought about by our mass struggles. Okay. And even when these programs survive, and in general at the university level, you see this, the changing of the curriculum itself, the content of the curricula. So all these different departments and programs, they're neoliberalized in their content and in their ideology. At worst, that's happening. And even at best, you see the sterile postmodern pontification in these programs as part of the neoliberal agenda. There's also the incredible increase in so-called criminal justice programs. They're actually criminal injustice programs, the glorification of the military and security careers on because that's where the employment is, and that's where the dominant ideology is infesting our students. So they want to study how to be part of Homeland Security, Drug Enforcement Agency, Border Patrol, etc. They invade our universities. The Pentagon launched Project Minerva 2 years ago. Project Minerva is massive Pentagon funding at public universities for social scientists. I'm a sociologist. For us to study civil uprisings around the world. What causes them? Where are they going to happen? And how can they be suppressed? Turn that money over to that's research over to the Pentagon. So it's the neoliberal conception itself of education which is also taking over, absent our fight back. And some of our students start to develop, and professors, a consumer mentality that they're purchasing even though they had to pay student loans and so forth, and they're never going to have a decent job, and most of us going down at this moment, they have inculcated in them the attitude that they're purchasing a commodity. I've had students say to me, not, I think I worked hard and so deserve, to get a good grade, but I paid a lot of tuition, so I should get a good grade. But this is part of the ideological indoctrination that's the neoliberal onslaught is imposing on our campuses and in our universities. And the final point that I want to end with, I'm doing okay with the time, I have a moment, is that student activism, historically at the forefront of our mass struggles, every young generation, whether you're students, whether you're immediately in the working class, whether you're in this countryside, youth play a critical role in social change and in our struggles, and they still do. Youth, together with the working class and the other mass social movements. So what we're seeing on our campuses at the public universities is that student activism is spreading very rapidly. And that's the positive side. But at the same time, because of this neoliberal onslaught and its impact, many of the young students now do not see the need to really push their activism to link it with revolutionary theory, with a radical critique of global capitalism, and to develop their critical thinking skills. And so here I will conclude by saying, thinking now from the point of our collective agency and our collective struggles, the role of us organic intellectuals linked to mass social movements becomes more important than ever in working with the students in our universities and in developing a student-worker alliance which makes the branch from on our campuses to all of our communities and to globally. And I'll end there. Thank you.